Welcome back into another episode of the Believe in Georgia Tech podcast. We are your co-hosts. That is J Schafer. I'm Jackson Caudell, coming to you Monday, June 2nd in the afternoon. A lot of stuff to discuss, as I'm sure most of you know. Baseball had another regional loss for what feels like the millionth year in a row. A lot going on there. We're kind of break all that down. Some slightly unexpected news. Georgia Tech athletic director J Batt leaving to go to Michigan State. That was finalized this morning. It started to become, it was a bit of a rumor to start out the day yesterday morning, and then Pete Thamel kind of put the nail in the coffin in the afternoon, saying that it was pretty close to being finalized. Michigan State announced it not long after, and then like the Georgia Tech put out a statement this morning about Batt leaving, so that is official, done. Georgia Tech needs a new athletic director, and they also need a new baseball coach. We're going to get into all that, talk about it all. Before we do, just the regular stuff. If y'all are watching this video and you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I'd love for you to do so. We've grown quite a bit. We love everybody that comes and hangs out with us, and is interested in Georgia Tech, likes hearing us talk about Georgia Tech. It's a privilege to be able to do here for on SI and all the work we do over there. So it's definitely thank you guys for subscribing, listening on podcast form. We definitely appreciate that. But all right, I guess let's talk baseball first. Just that can kind of segue into the bat discussion. So I did an instant reaction on Friday night. I was in good spirits. I was, pleasantly. I was a little worried coming into the regional. Everybody was picking Georgia Tech to win the regional. I saw a few stray Western Kentucky picks there because of the season they had. And it kind of worried me that nobody was picking Ole Miss to win their own regional. And I know there was, I want to say it was D1 baseball, or somebody said that Oxford was maybe the toughest region and the hardest one to predict. And so I was approaching with skepticism, as I'm sure a ton of people were. I've covered two previous regionals, one in Knoxville, one in Athens, and Georgia Tech lost both of the opening games as the 2-3 matchup. So I didn't know what to expect. Friday night was great. I talked about it at length in the pod. Tate McKee was awesome. The offense was pretty good. They won 9-2. And later Friday night, after I got done recording, Murray State beats Ole Miss in an upset. And it looked like the stars were in this. I don't mean to sound disrespectful to Murray State, but it looked like maybe the stars were aligning for Georgia Tech to get to face the 4 seed, win that game, and then you were one win away from your first super regional in a long time. So Georgia Tech played Murray State on Saturday evening, and it did not go well at all. Now, they got saved a little bit they came back a little bit, as I'm sure most of you know now. They jump up 3-0 in the top of the first, and even I, knowing the history of the baseball teams, was like, oh man, like after the strong show on Friday night and just come out firing on, in the first inning against Murray State, I was like, man, they're mean business. Like all the stuff about, Georgia Tech being pissed off and, angry they didn't get to host, they didn't like where they went, blah, 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 all this stuff. Like maybe it's actually true, but it really wasn't. Like it wasn't by the end of the first inning that Murray State was leading 5-3. Brady Jones could not make it through the first inning of the game. And the pitching, that the rest of that game and then into Sunday was an abject disaster. Mason Patel struggled. Like they just couldn't find anybody to come in. Like Caden Campbell came in and he had a solid outing when he pitched a little bit, but like I won't say it was amazing or anything. The offense was great. I mean, they scored 11 runs against Murray State. They scored 20 runs combined against Murray State and Ole Miss, and they lost both of those games. I guess, RJ, what were your thoughts? Yeah, let's stick with Murray State first before we kind of take it into Ole Miss. Georgia Tech couldn't ever catch up to Murray State after falling behind. They were behind, I think it was 10-3. It wasn't that the score at one point in time. They did kind of catch back up, but it was a disaster.
I mean, it was unfortunate as it gets. because throughout that game you saw Murray State bloop single after bloop single after bloop single after bloop single, and it just felt like they were grinding Georgia Tech down. Again, all due respect from Murray State to making it to the tournament. I understand that that's an incredibly hard thing. Georgia Tech had everything on the table. I mean, you were one game away from a final. You didn't have to play Ole Miss, um, and you thought that Murray State would have been an easier matchup than Ole Miss. Whether or not that was true for Georgia Tech, you could debate that, but the talent level of Murray State and Ole Miss is obviously going to show itself, and you just couldn't find anybody on the mound. I mean, there really wasn't. No matter who you threw out there, even Patel, um, he struggled. I mean, Brady Jones wasn't great. Campbell wasn't. Um, he was fine out of the pen, and then you bring in Caden to end the game. It just felt like you could never catch up from that deficit. You were up 3-0, and then Murray State scores 10 unanswered, and you just felt demoralized. Even when the game was close, I mean, you got back into that game, and it felt to a point where you could win it. You had all the opportunities on the table. You had multiple runners on base, and you just couldn't score them. Um, when you give up 13 runs to a 4 seed in a regional, I mean, it's hard to ever win those games. But with Georgia Tech's offense, with James Ramsey, who we'll talk about later, I mean, you always thought that you were in that game, and I mean, to the end, you couldn't pull through, and it just sucks.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at I mean, Jones got through 2/3 of an inning, 4 hits, 5 runs allowed, 5 earned runs. Didn't strike out anybody. I mean, it was really bad. Mason Patel, who I'm sure they were hoping to. He might have pitched Saturday, but if all because Brady Jones had a real good stretch of the season starting towards the end. He had like a no hitter through what 7, 8 innings against Louisville there when they won that series. Um, he was it was rough against Clemson in the ACC tournament. You're hoping you can put it behind you. Now, I will say this: I'm not at all excusing this. Murray State, like I know they're a 4 seed, but their calling card is their offense. Like their offense is
Yeah,
pretty good. Like it's like they've beaten Ole Miss and they beat Georgia Tech for a reason. I know they play in the elimination game tonight against Ole Miss again. Like that's a legitimately good offense. Now they shouldn't have. That's no excuse to give up this, but Mason Patel, you're hoping can come in and just all right, settle down. We'll catch back up on offense. It'll be fine. And again, 5 hits, 4 earned runs. He walked 3. I mean, walks were a big problem with him. It was not good. Brett Barfield, like he really wasn't in long enough. Like I said, Caden Campbell came in and he was fine. He struck out 5. He was really the only pitcher doing that. But just rough starts from Jones and Patel, and it just was the offense perfect. And it's hard to I'm not going to criticize them. They scored 11 runs. 7 of them came in 1 inning, so it wasn't like they were just inning after inning just churning out runs. But they were pretty good, and so that kind of set the stage for Sunday. Like you knew they were going into Sunday again. This was every regional that I've covered, Georgia Tech has lost one of their first 2 games and had to play an elimination game early Sunday. They were going against Ole Miss, who eliminated Western Kentucky earlier on Saturday. And it quite literally felt like almost the same exact game. I'm not remotely joking either. Everybody I'm sure watched. It was Georgia Tech goes up 3-0 on them. You get a home run from Burris walks, Schmidt hits a home run. It's 2-0 all of a sudden. Kyle Lodas comes to the plate. It's 3-0 all of a sudden, and you're like, I think there's a bit more caution just because of what had happened before, but it was like, okay, good start. We'll see what happens the rest of the way. And then by the end of the first inning, they were already trailing. Again, it was just like against Murray State the night before. And, Jalen just couldn't. It wasn't there. He didn't finish the first inning pitching yesterday. They went to Carson Ballard, who I think he threw a couple of scoreless innings in there because Murray State scored, or Ole Miss scored 5 in the bottom of the first. They get they get another one in the second. He pitches two scoreless innings in the third and the fourth. Those were actually the only two innings where Ole Miss didn't score a run. Like they scored in 7 of the 9 innings, which is not good. But the offense was great to start out. They scored 3 runs in the first. They had 7 runs in the first 4 innings, or am I reading that? 8 runs in the first 4 innings, and then scored 1 the rest of the way. And they had some chances along the way. Like Riley Stanford came in, and he had a problem with walking batters. Like that was his biggest thing. He didn't give up any earned runs, but he walked 3 batters, wasn't great. They tried to turn to Patel again, just trying to hope something could get going. That didn't work at all. And they lost 11-9. Look, the game was tied heading into the bottom of the seventh, 9-9, and Ole Miss got 1 run there to take a 10-9 lead. They got another run in the eighth. Tech did get the bases loaded again. I think it was Curse. He grounded out to start the inning, and then you had, I want to say it was a hit. Rogers was hit by a pitch, and then you had the bunt single, and then Burris got out, and then Schmidt was intentionally walked. And so you had the bases loaded. Lodi's come up and went down swinging. Like it's unfortunate. Again, I'm not really gonna. Do you wish one of your best players had gotten a base hit or a home run with the bases loaded? Sure. I just don't think I'm not going to put the foot of the loss on the offense here after the day they had.
And I mean, it's wishful thinking after scoring 9 runs to add 4 more. And to be fair, Drew Burris had struggled throughout the tournament. I thought this was by far his best game. Yeah. Even though he got out that one at bat, he was 2 for 4. He had 2 walks. This felt like the game where, the offense was churning. Again, it felt like the exact same game against Murray State. You were down 5-3 after the first inning, and you had nobody on the mound. Pretty much the entire top half of the order was working the entire day, and you just can't win. I mean, it gets to a point where you score 9 runs, you score 11 runs, and you can't back that up. It's I can't even think of really a word to describe it. It's just sad.
And look, this is I know there are some people obviously that have been frustrated with Danny Hall for a long time, but he's retired now. Like I'm not going to sit here and just pile on Danny Hall, but this is just familiar. Like when the first regional I covered back in feels like a million years ago, but back in 2022, they went up to Knoxville and were facing an absolutely stacked Tennessee team that was the number 1 overall seed, had a lead going into the 9th, and then just blew it. And you can say it was, Tennessee had a great offense that year, but it was similar to this. It's just and then last year when they let Georgia come back in that game in the final last year, it was just very similar. And just I'll say I felt better. The one thing about going into 2022, they had a great offense, but the pitching was an issue all year long. They had some of the ACC's worst pitching. This was actually one of their better pitching staffs in a while. This, and if you want to nitpick me and say, hey, well, they didn't face the strongest strength of schedule, so maybe that helped it. You might be right. I think that's probably a factor. I'm not going to go it's past time to debate that point, but this was a pretty good pitching staff heading for most of the year. Patel was awesome for most of the year. Brady Jones had his moments throughout the year, and Tate McKee had his struggles. He had that really bad game 1 against Louisville, but he was great Friday against Western Kentucky. Some different moments, and the bullpen was mostly pretty good. And then it completely collapsed in the 2 biggest games of the season.
Yeah, and I think to your point about, not really facing some of the top teams in the ACC and not, having a proven schedule, I think that kind of did show itself in the tournament because I think, you don't give up 11 runs, 13 runs if there's nothing pressure related. I don't know if they had been in a situation similar to what they saw in the tournament. I don't think they had seen a team like Murray State or Ole Miss, and been able to compete like they did. So I think there is something when it comes to strength of schedule, and the pressure that you face during the season translating to the postseason, because that pressure, it almost seemed like too much.
Yeah, it was. Season's over, and I guess that's the transition into our next topic. So, whether or not J Batt had stayed, that there was obviously going to be a decision that had to be made with baseball, because when Danny Hall did announce his retirement, it wasn't, well, hey, James Ramsey's the coach in waiting, like this is done deal. I don't know where it goes now, because like I said, I think it's probably time we talk about the elephant in the room, and that's J Batt leaving to go to Michigan State. I'll say this, as far as being surprised, I wasn't really, and I'm not at all sitting here saying, well, I knew he was going to Michigan State. I had somebody tell me, like, I had no idea he was going to Michigan State, but I think if you read the tea leaves a little bit, I think he was very much possibly looking to move in that direction, because, okay, back in November, I think it was Thanksgiving, I think, actually, when there was a lot of the rumors were pretty hot and heavy about South Carolina, and that seemed to be pretty serious. He didn't end up going there. Got a contract extension in December. It was like a 5-year extension, because he and Key both were tied through 2029. There was a Maryland rumor not long, but like I think even Batt himself even come out and said that wasn't true. But it seemed like with any open AD job at the SEC or the Big Ten, Batt was getting mentioned. I think that's a product of, yeah, but J Batt did a good job at Georgia Tech. We're going to get into some of the things that he did. He obviously stepped into a pretty tough situation, and I think really did make the most of it. Like, it's hard to argue that anybody could have done a whole lot better than what J Batt did. But it did kind of seem that he was getting mentioned for all these jobs, and it was, okay, which one's going to make him go? And like I alluded to earlier, you started to see some rumors late Saturday night, early Sunday morning that, hey, like Michigan State's kind of circling in on Batt. I know there were some Michigan State people saying, well, they got a list of candidates. Batt's one of them. They haven't really come down to one yet. And then again, the Thamel news kind of put it to bed, like he was going to Michigan State, was announced this morning. So I guess what was your initial reaction, when you saw, like, were you surprised? Were you just like, it kind of tracks with, kind of some rumors that's been out there, kind of what were you thinking?
Yeah, I wouldn't say surprised. It was more of, a feeling of, how do you move on from J Batt? I mean, that was honestly my initial reaction, because, again, we'll talk about his tenure at Georgia Tech here in a second, but it seemed like all of the jobs that he could have gotten were out of the window. Those were open throughout the athletic season. And then you start hearing the Michigan State rumors. It starts to get more serious. He starts to get in the short list. And then, once, again, like you said, once that Thamel report came out, that's pretty much as official as it's going to get until, MSU themselves, made it official. And it makes sense. I understand why you would want to take a Big Ten job. I understand why you want to take the Michigan State job. Again, it's not perfect, right? You're in the shadow of Michigan. Your football program's at an interesting spot. Basketball, you're going to have to make a big hire. Baseball hasn't been the greatest, but you can see why, I think Michigan State can deal out more money. I think they are in a pretty good recruiting hotbed, and they've shown in the past that they can bring in really good recruiting classes. Have they done that recently? No, but you can see in basketball, it's just next level hoops. Again, you have that in Atlanta too, but I think the amount of resources J Batt is going to have at Michigan State is going to be a lot more than he had at Georgia Tech, and he was able to fundraise very good at Georgia Tech. I imagine that's going to be at a completely another level Michigan State. So I'm just wondering what kind of moves he can make there, and I think this is, again, something that makes sense for Michigan State and something that makes sense for J Batt.
Yeah, and I think that was when he signed the extension. I was like, okay, I don't know that really puts it to bed if a big enough offer comes along. And like every Big Ten school now with this new TV deal that they're getting paid. It's a 7-year deal for $7 billion that runs through the end of the decade. Whether they choose to use it or not is another question. Every Big Ten school has money now. And I think that's maybe still a new reality for some people. I mean, look, Michigan State's always, been able to get good coaches and things like that. But, like take Indiana with Kurt Signetti, for example. Like, they were able to pull him away from James Madison. He has a season he did, and they were able to award him with a big extension where it's like, okay, if somebody comes and poaches him, like they're going to have to match the number. And it's just a lot of, I don't want to get into the whole college athletics debate and the landscape. That's just a super, super long discussion that we don't have time for on this certain episode. But it's like the Big Ten is just in such a financially advantageous position that even some of the lower schools that you might think of from an athletic standpoint are going to be able to offer a whole lot of money. And I'm not saying I'm not trying to say Michigan State's a lower tier Big Ten school. They're an upper tier Big Ten school, in my opinion. But they're going to be able to match any number and throw any number you got out there. And if it comes down to money, that's just what it's going to be. And reportedly, Batt is going to have it's a 6-year contract for $1.8 million annually. Now, one note in this is they are going to pay Georgia Tech, at least according to the Detroit Free Press. They're going to a buyout of a little over $2 million to pry Batt away. So, look, again, I don't know all the mechanics there is, where that money goes and what they use it for. Do they use it to hire the new AD? Do they just put it to I don't know. But you do get that at least. But so J Batt is gone. I think, obviously the first thing that most are going to remember from his tenure is the fundraising.
Yeah.
He had a reputation for that when he was at Alabama. That was, I'll never, I had just started, that was my first year on the tech beat. And, you had the Todd Stansbury being fired, you had Jeff Collins being fired. And, J Batt came in relatively quickly. I'd have to go back and see the exact timeline, but Collins and Stansbury were fired towards the end of September. And I want to say Batt was brought in by mid-October. Again, sorry if that's wrong, but I'll have to go back and look at it, but that feels mostly right. I think, he did a really good job with the fundraising. That's always going to be the number one things people mention. He did launch Full Steam Ahead, which, $500 million initiative to modernize facilities, enhance the student athletic experience, strengthen Tech's competitive edge. They've already got more than $300 million in pledges. And in the fiscal year of 2024, athletics raised reportedly $78.2 million, surpassing the previous single year high by 43%. So that's where Batt was really, really good at. And where does Tech go from here? I think is, the question that gets asked is, and it's just at an odd point in time in the calendar too, because the thing, when Stansbury was fired and they tried to work quick and they brought Batt in fairly quickly, from my recollection, is you needed an AD to make the football hire. You didn't want to hire a football coach with no AD, and then that's an awkward situation. And then also, that was Josh Pastner was coming up at the end of his time there, and obviously going into his last season, there was a lot of, okay, what does he got to show to prove or to say he's going to stay here long enough? Obviously, Batt fired him at the end of it and brought in Damon Stoudemire. And I think that's one thing that's going to, I think, play out in the future that we don't really know of is how good of a coaching hire person J Batt is. He did a good job getting Brent Key, but the Damon Stoudemire hire is still very much open in the air as to how he's going to do that. He never had to make a baseball hire. And, we don't know how good of a women's basketball coach Karen Blair is. So that, I think that's, if you were going to make, not even a criticism, but okay, I don't know how good Batt is at hiring coaches. Again, he hired Key. That was a really good hire. The fundraising and that part of it and getting the support, that was always the number one thing. And that's just such a huge part in college athletics now. And that's, what he seemed like obviously an up and comer. And I think that's what Michigan State was looking for, somebody to kind of lead them into that next step. And look, I think he'll do good there. I have no doubt that J Batt will do good there. But I guess, like I said, we got to talk about what does Georgia Tech do from now. And again, it's just such a weird timing because, athletics are pretty much ceasing right now. Like they're not. It's pretty much over for the calendar year. For the 2024-2025 athletic year, you're not really going to get anything started up until honestly football. Like I think there's some non-revenue sports in there that do that, but do they kind of take their time with this? And I know in the press release that we got today said a national search for Georgia Tech's next director of athletics will begin shortly. Additional details about the transition plan will be shared in the coming days. So we don't really even know who's running the show or like how things are operating right now. And again, it's kind of a quiet time when it comes to athletics as far as anything going on. So like I don't know that there's like an urgent need to say, hey, this person's in charge or whatever. But then I think the thing that complicates, or at least you have to question a little bit, is the baseball thing. Like, okay, Danny Hall's retired now, and the transfer portal's open. And do you try to hire an athletic director with a little bit of urgency to make the decision on the baseball hire? Do you hire a baseball coach without an athletic director? I mean, that would be a little awkward. But I mean, if say you're just dead set on hiring James Ramsey as the next head coach, do you just go ahead and name him the next head coach and try to prevent any transfer portal movement? I don't know. There's just a lot of different ways I could see this playing out, and none of it would. I'm not saying somebody's going to be hired by Friday, but like if somebody was hired in a couple of weeks, I don't know that I'd be shocked. If you told me after the 4th of July nobody was hired, I don't quite know that I'd be shocked either, because again, I think you're at a period of time on the calendar where you can kind of take your time a little bit and do that. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just think you're entering probably what's the most tricky time, because the athletic director is the one spot where you don't want to rush and make a hire. If you hire the wrong guy, things can go south pretty quickly. And I think you're going to see throughout this time, as the baseball season is winding down, a lot of these candidates, to be the next Georgia Tech baseball coach, because, Georgia Tech does have a pretty prestigious baseball program in my eyes. There are a lot of guys that they can get who may be off the table by the time that they can hire a new athletic director. And whether you want to go with James Ramsey, obviously Danny Hall put in his endorsement for him to be the next head coach. That's why he got the associate head coach title. Whether a new athletic director wants to respect that, or if they want to go national and, have the most quote unquote qualified guy. Obviously Ramsey's qualified for the job, but you could probably go get, almost any coach that you want for the Georgia Tech baseball job. I just think you're entering such a tricky position, but I do think it could be an attractive job, because J Batt started, the athletic program on such a good path for fundraising. I think you're on a really good path for football. You've had some really good recruiting classes in basketball. It's just a matter of who's going to want to take the job that quickly. Because I think if you do make a hire, you're going to have to make one. If you do make a new hire, I mean, you're going to have to make one pretty soon, and there are a lot of actions that are going to have to be made. But I also like that, this hire isn't going to have to happen in the middle of the football season. This is not in the middle of the basketball season. You don't really have, any active teams playing right now, so there's not a lot of pressure for a new AD. And Cabrera has shown, his commitment to athletics. He wants Georgia Tech to be competitive. He wants money to be coming out of these programs, and we had that under Batt, and now it's just a matter of continuing that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's every athletic director hire is a critical hire. Like it was, when they fired Stansberry and brought him back, like that was a super critical hire, because, like Tech athletics as a whole had just, kind of been trending down for a little bit. Like baseball was kind of still remaining steady, but obviously under Collins, football took a bit of a nosedive. You had the one ACC tournament title with Pastner, but, things were obviously shaky ground there. So the job is much more attractive now than it was 3 years ago, when they had to hire Batt. Like I believe that, like with every bone in my body. Now I will say this: if you're looking for a show that's going to name you a bunch of AD candidates, I don't. It's not going to be this one. I will just confess to you fully. Like if I heard something or if I knew something, I promise I would say it. But like this is not like AD hires can be just so expansive, and it's like, when they were looking to hire one in 2022, I would have never mentioned J Batt. I didn't know who J Batt was. I wasn't familiar with J Batt. So like, I don't want to sit here and give you a bunch of names that are just false. Like, that's not that's not what we want to do on this show. I will just throw two out there. If there is always a chance, maybe they really like the direct. I think they obviously they like the direction that Batt was going in. They signed him to a 5-year extension. I know, look, John Palumbo is a well-respected guy in that athletic department. I've met John a few times. I've talked with him. Like, he would probably be a good choice if they wanted to go internally. If they did go internally, I do feel like that's where it would go. And I know people are also going to probably mention Graham Neff at Clemson, the athletic director. He got a degree from Tech. He was a civil engineering graduate at Tech. He was a student manager for Paul Hewitt in the basketball program, when they got to the Final Four in 2004. I don't know. Like, I know that would take a lot, I would imagine, to do that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's impossible. I'm also not going to tell you it's likely, but I'm sure you will see that name tossed around. Those are the only two names I'm going to mention on here as just, I think those will be, and I'm not even going to mention them as like candidates. It's just, those are two names I would assume you're going to hear probably in the discussion at various points. Maybe it's, I don't know, but I just throwing those two out there. I don't really have any other candidates right now. I'm trying to kind of do my research into that and try to, look deeper into it and, all that kind of stuff. But just be fascinated to see kind of the timeline they're thinking. Does it take long? Do they do this in a couple weeks? Like, what's kind of the thinking here? And look, President Cabrera, he made a really good hire with Batt. So I think, he obviously deserves, I think, some trust in making the next one. I can tell you, he's fully committed to athletics and, being around him. And like, it means a lot to him to have a good athletics program. And, obviously he liked the direction Jay was on, and they're going to hope to build on that and, keep making it better because, I don't want to speak for all ADs, but like, and I would say this, even if J Batt was terrible, like, wasn't at Georgia Tech, but like, no AD is irreplaceable. It's just making the right hire to continue that success and make it even better, because you don't want to backslide in any avenue, whether it's fundraising, that kind of thing, whether it's making hires, all that kind of stuff, because obviously you could have an AD have to come in here and make a baseball hire. Most ADs make a number of hires during their terms and all that kind of stuff. So it'll just be interesting how they handle this whole thing. It's kind of funny timing just in the calendar, but we're going to see what they do. But that's pretty much all I got to say on it.
Yeah. I mean, just my one big question heading into the hire is I don't know what the mold of guy Cabrera is looking for, because I don't know if you want another guy like Batt that's kind of under the radar, hasn't really had athletic director experience, or somebody who's established as an AD and has the experience of, a lot of winning programs. I just, the options are heavy for Cabrera. I think Georgia Tech is going to have a decent amount of money to throw whatever candidates they want. So, there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think, whatever hire is made will be a good hire. I have no doubts in Cabrera.
Yep. So that's going to be our show today. I wanted to try to, just talk about the situation kind of as much as we know. Like, this is a day old. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of developments. You'll probably hear a lot of names. A lot of things will be circulating during this time period. So we're going to stay plugged into all that. We will do any shows, bring any new info that we can. And, again, super appreciative if anybody that's joining us. If you're new, be sure to hit the subscribe button before you leave us. Hit that like button. Follow us wherever you get your podcast. Love the little community we're building here, and appreciate you guys coming and hearing us talk about Georgia Tech and sharing your thoughts about Georgia Tech. Like, that's what it's all about. We do appreciate it, and we will see you next time. Thank you.